So that is one aspect of mental direct perceivers. Then some other texts, they also talk about mental direct perceivers in the form of clairvoyance, for example. Clairvoyance is a very interesting aspect of a direct perceiver because clairvoyance is not a conceptual consciousness. People with clairvoyance, they just know. They don't think it's maybe like this or maybe like that. They just know. So there's some scientific research being done regard to remote viewing, for example, which is a very interesting aspect of consciousness that people just just know. It's not they think it's maybe like this, maybe like they just know it appears, and then they just write or make a drawing what they saw. So that's a form of clairvoyance that is a direct perceiver, and a mental direct perceiver, because it's not based on sensory perception. So that's the first moment of a mental direct perceiver, or the first moment in this case of a clairvoyance, is what we call a valid cognizer. The second moment and subsequent moments we consider as subsequent cognizers, because they're not new as the first moment. They follow upon the initial moment, and that's why we call them subsequent cognizers. We come to that later, the difference between valid cognizers and subsequent cognizers. So for the time being, just think that there are mental direct perceivers which are not conceptual, and that also they operate, for example, when you see something, and then at the end of that consciousness, seeing the flower, of your eye consciousness, when that comes to an end, then we have a mental consciousness, which is a very small moment, and we cannot really apprehend, we cannot really realize or ascertain what appears, but based on that particular short period of mental consciousness, then we say, oh, I like this, or I don't like this, or then we have all the conceptualizations, right? So, and that, as we saw previously, that can be a difficulty, or that can be an obstacle, that when you have all kind of conceptualizations and that cause you to afflictions to arise or afflictions to become stronger, when you dislike something, because we want happiness and don't want suffering. So the moment you face an object you don't like, there's a kind of conceptuality with it, and then aversion arises, or when there's an object you get attached to, right? And you conceptualize it. So that means that conceptualization is based on this initial moment of mental direct perceiver, to which objects appear but not ascertained. But based on that, we have various forms of conceptualities which are not constructive. So based on those conceptualities, we create all kind of aspect of reality that gives disturbance. With strong desire, you want to be with this object, and when it's not possible, then aversion arises because out of attachment, you want to be with object. So then these conceptualities are actually a cause for suffering. So that's a little bit about the mental direct perceivers. Then, which are divided into that threefold division of valid cognizers, like, for example, clairvoyance, right? Or the clairvoyance of knowing another's mind, or the clairvoyance of knowing objects at a fast distance. And then every second moment of that clairvoyance is being considered as subsequent cognizer. And then the third division, as we talked about, is this awareness to which objects appear but not ascertained at the end of a continuum of your eye consciousness or your ear consciousness, seeing or hearing something, and there is a very small moment of mental direct perceiver at that time. So that is the mental direct perceivers. So then we go to the third group, the self-knowing direct perceiver. So the self-knowing direct perceiver is being defined as that which has an aspect of the apprehender, it says, free from conceptuality and non-mistaken. So free from conceptuality and non-mistaken, we already discussed, because it's a direct perceiver, and whatever is a direct perceiver is necessarily free from conceptuality and non-mistaken. But here the self-knowing aspect is the aspect of an apprehender. So there are two things. We have an apprehended and apprehender. So the object is apprehended, and then the apprehender is the mind that apprehends the object. So the apprehended is the object, the apprehender is the mind apprehending the object. So here it says, which has the aspect of an apprehender. Why? Because self-knowing consciousness, the object of self-knowing consciousness, is always consciousness, right? Because we say self-knowing consciousness is directed inwardly, is not outwardly. So that means that self-knowing consciousness focuses upon an internal object, which is consciousness, as we said before, and the aspect of apprehender is exactly explaining that, because it has an aspect of apprehending consciousness, right? So that's why it's been called apprehender. That's the other aspect of the definition. So the self-knowing consciousness in the mind-only school and the sutra school, we talk about self-knowing consciousness that is needed. Why is it needed? That is needed for memory. So how does memory come into existence? They say by having a self-knowing consciousness. Without self-knowing consciousness, there's no way you can remember the object you saw and that you saw the object. If you saw a particular person and to remember, you saw the person and to remember the object you saw, there's two aspects there, that can only come into being because there's a self-knowing consciousness. If there's no self-knowing consciousness, knowing what you saw, and knowing the consciousness that saw something, then you can never remember, because they say that sensory perception, the outwardly focused sensory perception, or the other knower, so to say, they only engage in external objects. So that's a kind of a proof for these schools of the sutra and the mind only, that you need a self-knowing consciousness in order to remember. In other schools of Buddhist philosophy, for example, in the consequent school, they don't accept self-knowing consciousness. They say there's no need for self-knowing consciousness, because if there's one aspect, if you have an eye consciousness apprehending the flower or seeing the flower, and that can only be remembered because there's self-knowing consciousness, then they argue then maybe that self-knowing consciousness should have a self-knowing consciousness, and that one should have another one. So you go an infinite regress of countless forms of self-knowing consciousnesses, and that is not really the case, as they say. So the consequent school then proves that there is no need for self-knowing consciousness. Why? Because we can remember things. Why can we remember things? Because whatever appears to your consciousness, that is realized directly, and the mind to which it appears is realized indirectly. So according to the consequent school, because the mind indirectly realizes itself and directly realizes its appearance, or the appearance of an object, that proves that in the future you can remember, I saw this, and you can remember the object you saw.